Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In today's video we are going to be talking about the Throne 2 which took place this weekend, and they aimed to make a spectacle with this event, and suffice to say they succeeded. This was one of, if not the best Smash event of the year. Such a joy to watch. Almost every single set was a 10 out of 10 banger. And for our finishers, you're going to have Drybie, Chunkykong, Shadic, and Mars in 13th, Riddles, Kola, Tilde, and Muteace in 9th, Rimu and Zackray in 7th, Candle and Tweek in 5th, Hurt in 4th, Mkleo in 3rd, Light in 2nd, and the back-to-back champion is going to be Spargo. Let's get right into things, and I want to say right away that the invites did really well at this event for the most part, starting off with Drybie, who a lot of people did not think was going to do well, did not think was going to be able to break the Pichu curse. But not only does Drybie break the Pichu curse, he actually manages to do so twice. In the pool's phase, he's in the pool with Mars, Zackray, and Spargo. He takes a game off Zackray, as well as managing to take Spargo to game 5, but his set win is going to come over Mars, and that definitely makes sense. Pichu is a rough matchup for Zero, so it's really hard for her to hit that small frame, but still, very impressive to be able to pull it off. And then you have Drybie getting another win in the Gauntlet phase, which was arguably more impressive over Shadic in a game 5 set, and I don't think that's a good matchup for Pichu. I do think that he would struggle there, that big sword of Corn as well as the pretty strong kill power, but managed to overcome Shadic as well, and then he ends up falling to Mkleo in the Gauntlet phase, but still takes a game versus Leo despite how well Leo's playing. And finally, in the main bracket, he has the misfortune of running into Candle, which is a very difficult matchup for Olimar, in my opinion. He actually ends up going Brawler in the first game, and it doesn't end up working out, though. He, of course, still ends up taking a game, and Drybie was one of, if not the most impressive players of the weekend. I know I already said that, but I feel like I really want to hammer that point home. He just looks so good in his play, and the way that he was playing Pichu was not unlike anyone I'd ever seen before, but there were certain moves that he was just getting way more value out of than most Pichu players, like Nair, for example. His usage of Nair was unbelievable, just putting opponents into tech chase situations, resetting neutral in general, and just keeping up the pressure without damaging himself. It was just really, really smart. Very impressed by Drybie's play this weekend. Even though he still ends up getting 13th place, he gets a lot of very nice wins under his belt, and he's the first ever Pichu player to finally break the curse at one of these invitational events. Next up in 13th place is going to be Chunkykong, yet another invitee, and he's going to get a massive win in the pools phase over Shadic, and I really can't understate how impressive that is, just considering that Donkey Kong Corn is really tough for Corn, or rather Donkey Kong, in my opinion. The only real boon for Donkey Kong is going to be the fact that Corn's mobility is fairly similar to DK, so she's not going to be beating him in that aspect. She's just going to be beating him with a massive sword and much more deadly advantage state, even though DK's advantage state is really good. That Corn up air is just such a nightmare for that big body character, but Chunkykong manages to come out on top this time around, so huge props in for that one. The rest of his pools phase doesn't go as well. He does manage to take Riddles to game 5 in a really, really competitive set that he low-key should have won, or maybe could have won, but doesn't end up doing so. And then versus Hurt honestly just played versus Chunkykong extremely well. Like, I was very surprised. I thought that set was going to be a lot more competitive, just because Donkey Kong will blow up Snake if Snake gives him the chance, but Hurt was giving Chunkykong, like, literally zero chances. In the Gauntlet phase, he has the misfortune of running into Min Min, and I don't think I need to explain to you how bad Min Min Donkey Kong is, though he still manages to take a game. And in the main bracket, he once again gets a little bit unlucky and runs into Tilde, and I don't have to tell you how bad Donkey Kong Falco was. It is a little bit nice for both the Min Min and the Falco matchup that you can't get those edge guards as DK, but also I'm more worried about Donkey Kong getting edge guarded and Donkey Kong being comboed in the disadvantage state, and that is ultimately what happened to Donkey Kong. But I thought he was playing extremely well this weekend. Again, that win over Shadic is absolutely massive, and it's definitely something to be proud of. And our final invitee in 13th place is going to be Mars, and unfortunately for Mars, he is one of the people that ends up going 0-5 this weekend. In his pool, he had Zackray, Spargo, and Drybie, and I think matchup-wise, Zackray was probably his best bet there, just considering that I think Zero Suit does really well into Pit, but Zackray is just playing out of his mind in the pool's phase, if I'm going to be honest, so he ends up losing that one 3-0, and Spargo has always been a thorn in Mars' side, so he ends up losing that one 3-0, not really a big surprise there, and I believe it was just Cloud versus Zero Suit. The Ages didn't even have to come out, and versus Drybie as well. It is a tough matchup for Zero Suit, so it does make sense that Drybie would be able to get the upset, especially considering how well he was playing. You're going to have Muteace 3-0ing Mars in the Gauntlet phase, and that's honestly not something I have a ton to say, but Muteace typically does pretty well against Mars, especially in more recent memory, so it definitely makes sense. And then finally, he is going to lose 3-1 to Rimu. Now, I do think that as a Zero Suit player, you probably should be beating the mid player, but this is a matchup that Mars in no world was ready for. I mean, most players in NA weren't ready for this. this matchup. The guy that took 2 years off competitive Smash is definitely not going to be ready for this matchup at the super high level. So it's an unfortunate tournament from Mars. I don't think he played his best, but it wasn't like he was playing absolutely garbage. He still managed to take a couple of games in his sets versus amazing players, but someone's got to get last, and it was just him this time around. And our final 13th place finisher is going to be Shadic, and he also unfortunately goes 0-5 this weekend. And I think he had a pretty good pool, all things considered. He did have very hard players in this pool, but for a player of his caliber, I think he should have been able to deal with it. He ended up going 0-3 versus both Hurt and Riddles. Hurt definitely makes a lot more sense. That one is like actually a pretty difficult matchup for Korin, but usually you have Shadic doing pretty well against Riddles, but the Terry I think was the real switch up this time around. I think it's normally the Kasia from Riddles, but the Terry leaps and bounds better in that matchup. And then versus Chunkykong and ends up going game 5. But if you're not playing in your A game, and Shadic was definitely not playing on his A game, that DK is a character that will blow you up. The risk reward isn't skewed into Donkey Kong's favor, but both the risk and the reward are extremely high, and Chunkykong capitalized on the risks extremely well. In the gauntlet phase, he's going to end up fighting Drybie. Does lose that one game 5 as well. I do think that Pichu can be not a bad matchup for Korin. I would say that Korin probably wins if I had to give it to someone, but mobility-wise and edge-guarding-wise, it is a little bit scary for Korin off stage, and Drybie dances around those massive Korin hitboxes extremely well to his credit. And finally, in the main bracket, you have Shadic running into Kola, and you had Kola beating Shadic at their last encounter. I believe it was at Patchwork, but I wouldn't quote me on that one. So it makes sense that Kola would be able to win this one, but historically, Shadic had been really good in that head-to-head, almost always coming out on top. I do think Korin is favored in that matchup, so I think that is yet again another side of Shadic maybe not playing at his best. Even if Shadic was playing better, though, I still think Kola could have won. I think all of these players could have won. This isn't to discredit any of them, but undeniably, Shadic got on his A game. Will he be on his A game at his next tournament? I'm pretty confident he will be. Moving on to our 9th place finisher, starting off with Kola, who ends up being in the tiebreaker pool, which had Tweek, Rimu, and Candle. And his win is going to be coming from Candle. He ends up losing the first game with Roy, and then goes Cloud in the next 3 games and ends up winning all of them. Very difficult matchup for Olimar, so that definitely makes sense. He's going to end up losing in a game 5 set to Rimu, though, actually. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about Rimu, but very impressive considering that Kola has beaten Doramigi before. No slouch in that matchup. And then finally, he's going to end up losing to Tweek 3-1, but because his game count was pretty good against Tweek and Rimu, he is going to end up being the 2nd seed of the pool. So in the gauntlet phase, he only had to fight one person, but unfortunately for him, he ended up losing that set against Muteace 3-1. So he starts the final day in the loser side, gets that really nice win over Shadic, but ends up losing to Zackray 3-1. And I honestly don't really know what to say about Pitt versus Roy. I can't even guess the intricacies of that matchup. I will say it would be nice for Pitt to actually be able to get value out of his sword being more disjointed than Roy, at least the good part of the sword being more disjointed than Roy. And I'm sure Zackray got a ton of value out of that, but it's a decent running from Kola. Of course, he's going to get a couple nice wins under his belt, most notably that Shadic one, and low-key candle stocks are probably going to be going up, so definitely not the end of the world for him. Next up is going to be Muteace, and he's going to end up getting 3rd in his pool phase. He wins a Game 5 set over Tilde, loses a Game 5 set to Light, which shout out to him for making that one very close. It has been a long time since Muteace has beaten Light. That's just a very dominant record in Light's favor, but he came close this time around. And then Mkleo as well is going to get that dub over Muteace 3-1. And that's normally a set that historically, or rather recently, Muteace has been winning, so props to Leo for that adaptation. They're both Light and Leo were playing amazing at this event, so kind of unlucky to have them both in your pool. In the gauntlet phase, he is going to get Mars right away, which, as we already talked about, that's a set where he normally does pretty well, wins that win 3-0, as well as getting a 3-1 win over Kola to start the final bracket in the winner's side, where he right away runs into Hurt, which I think is a really, really difficult matchup to play as anyone, but especially as Muteace, just because of the amount of microspacing that he tends to do, and to microspace against everything that Hurt is doing feels like an absolute nightmare. Like, his hands are going to be in splints after that set, I can almost guarantee it. And in the loser side of the bracket, he ends up running into Candle, and he does lose that one 3-1. I do think Olimar honestly does pretty well against Peach. You're able to match that damage output. You do have those disjoints of the Pikmin, and also Peach's mobility, I think, can be a pretty big issue in that matchup. You're also able to just throw the Pikmin at Peach. It's really hard to microspace against them, but you often are just getting clipped out of the air or sniped off stage with a purple. So 9th place for Muteace. Again, got a couple nice wins along the way, but not the best placement he could have got. Next up in 9th place is going to be Tilde, and I gotta say, it's been a little bit since we've seen Tilde at the super top level of Smash Ultimate, and I definitely missed it. This is one of my favorite players to watch, and he did not disappoint at this event. In the pools phase, he's going to lose that Game 5 to Muteace, like I mentioned, as well as Game 4s to both Mkleo and Light, and big props to Light for that. We'll talk about that when we talk about that, but in the Gauntlet phase, he's going to end up getting a Game 5 win over Candle, and honestly, huge props to Candle for making it that close. I think Falco does pretty well in that matchup, but for the next Gauntlet set, he's going to end up running into Riddles. Man, just to take a game there, but Riddles ultimately sent him to the loser's side on day 3, where he gets that win over Chunkykong. Again, bit of a tough draw for Chunkykong, but Tilde will definitely take it, where then he runs into Tweek, which is not a great draw for Tilde. I don't believe he's ever beaten Tweek, but both of their sets prior to this had been pretty close. I think it goes like Game 3 to best of 3 and Game 5 at LMBM. But this time around, that was not the case. Tweek looked not dominant in the set, but he looked very confident in the set. He was the one that was in the driver's seat the entire time, and Tilde ends up losing that one 3-0. So Tilde got a couple decent wins this weekend. Not the best event for him overall in terms of the rankings, but I gotta say, it was just so nice to see him at the top level of Smash competing again, and he looked competitive in every single set that he played. And our final 9th place finisher is going to be Riddles. And I gotta say, on day 1 and 2 of this event, I kind of thought Riddles was going to win the entire thing. He was playing so well. He is going to lose a Game 5 set to Hurt in the pools phase, but it was extremely competitive, and that was the only set that I was a little bit surprised that you didn't see the Kazuya come out from Riddles, but I think he was making it a point at this event that he didn't want to try any Kazuya, which I could definitely respect, and it's not like the Terry rather, wasn't even close. He still managed to take it to Game 5, just barely couldn't close it out, but managed to get a 3-0 win over Shadic and a Game 5 win over Chunkykong to get into the 2nd seed of his Gauntlet, so he only has to beat one person in the Gauntlet phase, and that person that he beats in the Gauntlet phase is going to be Tilde in a 3-2-1. So he starts day 3 in the winner's side, where he has the immediate misfortune of playing Light, and on day 3, Light was the player that I thought was going to win the entire event. Spoilers for the future coming up here, but he was just playing really, really well, so it makes sense that Riddles would end up losing that one. And I also gotta say, really nice to actually see Light and Riddles play. I feel like it's been forever since those guys have clashed, and it's just such a banger set whenever they do. And in the losers bracket, Riddles has the misfortune of running into Rimu, and I do mean the misfortune of running into that matchup. It is a really difficult one for the FGC characters, and while Terry has the most mobility to, in theory, avoid that mid-min shenanigans, in practice, it is just extremely difficult to do so. So Riddles ends up falling at 9th place, but I think he should be pretty confident in how he was playing this weekend. He looked really, really good, and the Terry is the best I've seen in a long time. And we have arrived at the top 8, starting off with our 7th place finishers, which are Rimu and Zackray. Specifically starting off with Rimu, he's going to be in that tiebreaker pool. He ends up losing 3-0 to both Tweek and Candle, but gets that Game 5 win over Kola, which is like probably one of the most impressive wins of the weekend, to be honest, just considering how aggressive Kola is as a player and the way that he is able to make space for a mid-min player to be able to stop him and say, hey, that pressure isn't going to work on me, die off stage at 40%, I think is really impressive. I know the matchup is bad for Roy, I'm very well aware of that, but to be able to execute on the super top level, especially when it's the first time traveling outside of your country for competitive Smash Ultimate, I think is extremely impressive. He also gets Chunkykong in the Gauntlet phase, which was a set that he looked really confident in, which definitely makes a lot of sense. I would be honestly pretty shocked if Rimu didn't end up winning that one. Chunkykong, or rather Donkey Kong versus Min is really, really tough. And then he ends up running into Spargo, which is honestly just a terrible draw to get, all things considered. Spargo is really good against Min in my opinion, even though his characters are extremely edge guardable. That high tempo is just something that is really hard to match as pretty much anyone in the world. He beats Mars, as we already mentioned, for his first matchup in the main bracket, and I do think that's probably a little bit of matchup unfamiliarity there from Mars, but I think Rimu still played it extremely well. To be able to actually lock Zero Suit down in midair is impressive, as any character gets that win over Riddles as well in another Game 4. FGC characters just really, really struggle against him, and not a lot to say there. And then finally, once he gets in the top 8, he has the misfortune of running into Candle once again, and once again, it is a 3-0 in the Olimar player's favor. I do think Olimar does pretty well there. Also, Candle just looked really comfortable in that matchup. So yeah, Rimu, for their first event in the US, did amazing. They should be really, really happy with their play here. Got a bunch of super solid wins on some of NA's best talent, and I hope we get to see them again. And our other 7th place finisher is going to be Zackray. And it was such a treat to see this guy in NA again. I don't think he's been in NA since he actually picked up Pit. So that was probably a pretty big surprise for all of these North American players. Obviously, they knew he was going to be playing the Pit. But knowing the Pit's coming is a lot different than actually taking a set off of it. And no one managed to do that in his pool phase against Spargo, Drybie, and Mars. He wins 3-1 against all of them, which is like obviously very impressive, especially against Mars because that matchup is so bad. And also Spargo is like, the best player in the world, so obviously it's pretty difficult to beat him. But his arrow stunts were like actually insane versus Spargo. And in the main bracket, he ends up skipping the gauntlet phase because he does manage to be our first seed. He ends up running into Mkleo, and some things just never change. Mkleo still comes out on top in a 3-1 victory where he does manage to beat Kola to get into top 8. And once again, this is another set where you saw Zackray making some crazy snipes with the arrows. He was actually getting so much value from them, and it really made me underrate that move and realize how wrong I've been. I think pit arrows and pit down B are some of the most underrated moves in the game. Just the sniping potential that you get with the pit arrows to actually get people off stage, as well as that defensive utility that you get from down B. It's literally a shield in the air, and I don't know why anyone else isn't figuring that out. Literally no other character in the game has anything like that. It is such an amazing tool, and Zackray made a lot of value out of it in this weekend. But once he gets into top 8, he has the misfortune of running into Tweek, and that is going to end his bracket in a 3-0. But it was really nice to see Zackray again in NA. I haven't seen him play against so many of these players in quite literally years, and also we haven't seen any of these players play against a high level pit before, so it was just all so much fun to watch. On to our 5th place finisher, starting off with Candle, who was arguably our most impressive player of the week, and they just performed so insanely well, coming from the tiebreaker pool with Tweek, Kola, and Rimu. They're going to lose both 3-1 to Tweek and Kola, but gets that 3-0 over Rimu, like I mentioned. And honestly, if they didn't run into like specifically Tilde for the 4th seed in the gauntlet phase, I think Candle had a really good shot of being a winner's side seed of this bracket, just because that's such a difficult matchup for Olimar, and they still managed to take it all the way to game 5. But starts the main bracket in the loser side, starting off with a win over Drybie, which is definitely a tough matchup for Pichu, all things considered. Olimar just explodes that character, but still take that win, especially considering how well Drybie was playing that weekend. It gets a 3-1 win over Muteace as well. Again, that is a matchup where I do think Olimar does well, but not well enough to ignore the fact that you are beating one of the best players in the world, the best Peach player in the world. So big ups to that. Gets in the top 8, beats Rimu once again. Very confident that they should be able to win that set. Olimar Minmin, I do think is definitely in Olimar's favor. You can get some of those snipes off stage, and it's really hard for Minmin to actually get the Pikmin off of Olimar, or rather the other way around, for her to get the Pikmin off of herself. So makes sense that Candle should be winning that one, but a 3-0 both times I do think is pretty impressive. And then in the main, or not in the main bracket, but finally rather, they run into Spargo, and that is where the run is going to end, because Cloud Olimar is really, really tough for Olimar, but you still had Candle taking a game in that set against Spargo, who ended up winning the event, which I think shows how well they were playing. This is a player that I need to see at more events now. Someone that is absolutely, if they weren't on your radar before, they definitely need to be one of the future players of Smash Ultimate, if they're not already one of the top talents of the game, and they should be really happy with how they played this weekend. And the other 5th place finisher is going to be Tweek, and he's going to be coming from the tiebreaker pool, but that doesn't really matter for him because he wins the pool 3-1 over Kola Candle and 3-0 over Rimu. So he starts the second day, or the third day I should say, in the winner's side of the bracket, where he immediately runs into Spargo, and they have a game 5 set, one of the best sets of the tournament, but Spargo comes out on top. Tweek falls to the loser side, where he runs into Tilde, and normally their sets are a lot more competitive, but I think Tweek was playing pretty well on that day 3, and he ends up beating him 3-0, as well as 3-0ing Zackray right after. And I thought Zackray would maybe give Tweek a little bit of trouble, just considering that he's actually never beaten Zackray before, or I don't know if I should say never beaten Zackray before, but prior to this, Zackray had a very dominant record on Tweek, but he had never played against the Tweek Diddy Kong, and also I guess Tweek had never played against the Zackray Pit, and it turns out that Diddy definitely beats Pit. Not really surprised there. So you have Tweek winning that one 3-0, and then he has the misfortune, and I do mean misfortune, of running into her at 3-0. I think it's one of the last players you want to see as Tweek, just because Snake does extremely well against Diddy Kong. Now, we did see Tweek bring out the Sephiroth against her, and it looked decent in that game 3, and I don't think in the future that would be a bad choice for Tweek if he invests more time into it, just considering that I think that is a matchup where Sephiroth does okay. You're able to get a lot of value out of the massive disjoints and Sephiroth's advantage state, but it is still one that you have to play very well. You are literally as light as Olimar as that big body character, so Snake is going to be killing you in 1 or 2 seconds. You got to be careful careful in that matchup. So doesn't end up working out this time around for Tweek. I'm really curious to see what his next set versus her, though, is going to look like. Is it going to be Diddy Kong? Is it going to be Sephiroth? Is it going to be a third mystery character? Who knows? In fourth place, you're going to have her, and he also ends up winning his pool. He's going to 3-0 Shadic, which definitely makes sense. Tough one for Corn. 3-0 Chunkykong, and I actually thought Chunkykong was going to be able to win that one just because that DK advantage state is so strong, but especially against a character like Snake. But you had that amazingly played by her. He was just super patient, weaved around the hitboxes from Chunkykong very well. And then the most impressive win of, honestly, the weekend from her is going to be his Game 5 win over Riddles. I definitely think that her struggles against FGC characters. Specifically, he struggles against Kazuya. And though you didn't see the Kazuya come out against her, I do think Terry follows a lot of similar problems, that close quarters combat can be tough. And also, they're really good at taking trades against Snake just because they're going to be having that similar big boy weight. And they're also going to be, hitting Snake when the grenade explodes. And Terry and Kazuya are hitting you pretty hard, even if it is just with their aerial. So you are going to be losing a lot of those trades. Obviously, situational. If you have the lead, then you're winning. But what I'm saying is the FGC characters, they give Snake and her a tough time. But he managed to get that win over Riddles and start day 3 in the winner's side of the bracket, where he immediately beats Muteace to get into the top 8 to the winner's side. And I definitely expect him to beat Muteace there. It's really hard to microspace against a grenade that gets thrown across half of the stage. Once in the top 8, he ends up running into Light in the winner's side of the bracket. And I would always expect Light to be the favorite against her. I think he's pretty good against Snake, and he's just so overwhelming. That's really hard for her to set up. But I wouldn't expect it to be in this fashion, a 3-0 for Light. He looked really, really competitive, but rather dominant in that encounter. And then you're going to have a 3-0 win over Tweek as well in the loser side. A lot of 3-0s for her here. And makes sense. Diddy Kong, I think, doesn't do super good against Snake. And while Sephiroth is maybe a little scarier on paper, it's also Sephiroth. You kill that character with an up tilt at 70%. And then finally for her, he is going to run into Spargo. Takes him to Game 5, one of my favorite sets of the event, but ultimately bows out. And once again for her, I feel like my main theme of him at this event is he played against so many people that I just want to see him play against again. I want his run back versus Spargo and Light and Tweek and Riddles and especially Shadic. I just want to see how these players would adapt to him and how he would adapt to them. The highest placing Japanese player at the event, which definitely makes sense. He was also the first seed Japanese player at the event, but big props to him for the placement. Played extremely well. In third place, you're going to have Mkleo, and he's going to get second place in his pool with a 3-1 win over Tilde and Muteace. And Muteace had beaten Leo in their last 2 encounters, so it's got to feel good to get that win over him. Had to make some mental adaptations there. And finally, in the pool's phase, he's going to end up losing 3-0 to Light. So he has to go through the gauntlet phase where he gets a 3-1 win over Drybie. In the first game, it's Meta Knight versus Pichu, which Drybie ends up winning, and then the rest of them are going to be Aegis Pichu, which is like really difficult for Pichu. Then he starts day 3 in the winner's side of the bracket, gets the 3-1 win over Zackray. As I mentioned, some things really never change, and once he gets into top 8, he has his first set against Spargo, and he ends up winning that one, Game 4, and that Game 4 was peak. And you all know what I'm talking about with the counters. I have never seen anything like that. I will never see anything like that. Genuinely one of the greatest clips in Smash Ultimate history. I'm sure it's on the screen right now. Unbelievable stuff from Leo. And at that point, I honestly thought he was going to win the event. But then the other guy that I thought was going to win the event stops him in Light 3-1. So Light ends up beating Leo twice at this event. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about Light, but just, I guess, props to him. And for Leo, he does not get his run back against Spargo. Manages to take it to Game 5, though. Made it as competitive as he could, but ultimately falls at third place. And Leo has just been on such a massive uptick recently. You got to give him as much credit as you can. He's been playing unbelievably well, and it's not just the Joker as well. It's mainly the Joker, but he's getting value from other characters. I should mention in the winners finals, he ends up going Byleth against Light, and even though he doesn't end up winning, he still does manage to take a game there. So the Joker, the Byleth, the Aegis, even the Meta Knight, all of Leo's characters are putting in work. He's clearly putting in work to improve, and it is paying off massively. In second place, you're going to have Light, which is yet another player that I thought was going to take the entire event. There were so many people that were just playing out of their mind this weekend that were all contenders for number 1. And Light was going to be number 1 for his pools. 3-0 over Mkleo, 3-2 over Muteace, and 3-1 over Tilde. And I actually think that 3-1 over Tilde is his most impressive win, just considering that he had never beaten Tilde before. I think Falcon was pretty good against Fox. You're able to get some really solid edge guards as well as having a nice advantage state, but Light was just playing like really really good on point against Tilde, as well as both Leo and Muteace. So he ends up winning that one, and he starts in the winner's side of day 3, where he immediately runs into Riddles, and that could be a really scary opponent for Fox, really for anyone, especially the way that Riddles was playing. But Terry is a character that can definitely go blow for blow with Fox in that CQC area, but Fox, or rather Light, managed to navigate around Terry there and get that 3-1 win over Riddles, as well as a 3-0 win over Hurt once he gets into the top 8. And once Light was in this top 8, that's when I thought, okay, maybe he's going to win this event. And then after this Hurt set, I was like, oh my god, he's going to win the event. He was playing so well. His pressure against Hurt was unbelievable, and he keeps that up in the winners finals against Mkleo, where he gets that 3-1 win. So he manages to beat Leo twice this weekend, only dropping 1 game in both of the sets. And for their future encounters, I honestly have no idea what Leo is going to do. I feel like he should probably go back to Joker, even though the Byleth does end up doing pretty well. I don't think Byleth is a bad matchup into Fox necessarily. That disjoint is very nice, and you are able to get some pretty solid edge guards, but compared to Joker, where you can get Arsene and just be like better Byleth for a second, and also have gun, better combo ability, better mobility by a lot, I do think Joker is probably the best bet, but I definitely like that Leo ends up trying it out, even though it was not successful. So Light sitting in winner side grand finals, and he ends up running into Spargo, and Spargo resets the bracket 3-0 in actually the first set, or no, I should say 3-1 in the first set, and then the reset is a 3-0 for Spargo. So Light, up until the grand finals, looked like he was going to be the winner of this event, but he couldn't stop the 2-time. So our big winner of the throne to the back-to-back champion is going to be none other than Spargo. He's going to start off as the 2nd seed of his pool with a 3-0 win over Mars. Makes sense. Historically, he's been really good there, as well as a Game 5 win over Drybie. And honestly, huge props to Drybie for managing to make it that close. You definitely have some win conditions against Pichu or against Cloud as Pichu, but still be able to execute them against Spargo is another story. And he ends up losing in a 3-1 against Zackray. As I mentioned, the arrows were able to get a lot of value for Zackray in that set. So you have Spargo going through the gauntlet phase, reruns into Rimu. And for any other Cloud player in the world, I think that would be a problem. But Spargo is obviously not any other Cloud player in the world. He is like 30 times faster than all of them, and he ends up winning that one in a 30 himself, a 3-0, and he starts the final bracket in the winner's side, where he immediately ends up running into Tweek, and he gets that win in a Game 5. As I already mentioned, one of my favorite sets of the tournament. It's always a banger when those guys play, and it's been quite some time since they played. Actually, that's a lie. They ended up playing at Cirque, where Sparkle also ended up winning, so now he's got 2 wins on Tweek in a row, but prior to Cirque, it had been quite a time since they had played. So to be able to have that nice record on the current best player in America has to feel good for Spargo. In top 8, though, he ends up losing to Mkleo in that Game 4, and that Game 4 absolutely traumatized him. I can guarantee it, because in the loser side, he was playing with a fire, a passion he did not want to lose. He 3-1 Candle, shouts to Candle for even taking a game, to be honest. Gets that Game 5 win over Hurt, gets that Game 5 win over Mkleo, and honestly, the second that Spargo got into that grand finals, it didn't matter who he was playing against. Nobody stood a chance. He gets a 3-1 win in the first set and a 3-0 win in the second set to solidify himself as the back-to-back champion of the throne, and also the current best player in the world. I think we already knew Spargo was the best player in the world, but I think this event really cements it. And with that, I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the sport. It's been absolutely unreal as of late. If there's anything I left out, got wrong, or if you just want to say hi, leave a comment down below. Be sure to sub while you're down there, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.